this dog, and it will bite you.
As far as differences from the books go in House of the Dragon, I think this 6th episode, titled Faceless Men, has diverged the most from the Fire and Blood novel, and nearly everything that happened here is an invention of the show, but there are several major differences. For instance, Criston Cole not being killed by Alyssane Blackwood, a.k.a. Black Aly, Daemon never really going on a side quest at King's Landing, and Corlys being attacked by Bold Jon Roxton. But the list goes on, and that's why in this video, I'm going to be exploring every major deviation, divergence, and difference between the events of the 6th episode and their counterpart events from the Fire and Blood novel. It's going to be a good one, so let's start with the obvious one. Sir Criston Cole rests in pieces in the Riverlands. Now, even though in the book Criston Cole falls to the Black's arrows, the show still made several changes. In the 6th episode, Criston Cole is met with the combined might of House Tully and the Winter Wolves, who are led by Lord Oscar Tully and Roderick Dustin. In the book, however, Cole instead faces 3 commanders. Roderick Dustin was one of them, but the other 2 were Pate of Longleaf and Garibald Grey instead of young Oscar Tully. In fact, the line that Oscar speaks about not having enough bones of traitors was actually spoken by Garibald Grey in the book. You see, Oscar Tully actually aligned with Queen Rhaenyra quite early in the course of the battle, but that wasn't so in the book, where House Tully ended their neutrality to join Rhaenyra much later. As for Criston Cole's death, he does ask his opposing commanders if his men could be spared if he struck his banners, but to no avail. In the book, a Riverland bastard named Red Rob Rivers and his men shot Cole down with arrows, but in House of the Dragon, Cole is killed by a woman, who we'll come to know as Alyssane Blackwood or Black Aly. In the book, Black Aly is one of the greatest archers in the entire Black Army, and she commands the archers of House Blackwood, but even better than her is Red Rob, who serves under her charge. In fact, after Cole was felled, Pate denounced him, saying, "I'll have no songs about how brave you died, Kingmaker. There's tens of thousands dead on your account." And then the Blacks decapitated his corpse. I should note here, though, that Red Rob and Black Aly's characters have been merged into one single character, much like the show did with others, for example, Shirako Lohar and Rhaena Targaryen. As for Black Aly, you'll be seeing more of her in the times to come, and specifically in Season 4, where she'll hold a lot of sway over one of the strongest Black supporters. I'm talking about Lord Cregan Stark, Lord of Winterfell, and Black Aly's future husband. Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen in King's Landing is failing. After Sir Hypocrite Cole's rather quick death, we return to the palace where the love of his life lives, King's Landing. Alicent and Helaena had been trapped within the walls of the Red Keep in the last episode, and the show tried its best to make us believe that this was it for the mother and daughter. However, book readers knew that this was just a build-up for no good reason, as both Helaena and Alicent have a role to play in the times to come. The 2 are found by Rhaenyra's guards, and of course, none of this happened in the book. Meanwhile, Rhaenyra sits in on yet another small council meeting, one that was made up entirely for the show because the events they're talking about never took place in the book. Daemon is pissed off because he lost Sir Luther Largent rather unceremoniously, as he was killed off by the King's Landing spies working for Lord Ormond Hightower. He wants to take his dragon to Tumbleton and take care of Ormond, but Lady Mysaria and others at the small council advise against it. However, the strongest voice that commands Rhaenyra's attention comes from Alan of Hull, who, by the way, has still not been legitimized by show Rhaenyra. Well, by this point in the book, he and his brother had definitely been legitimized by book Rhaenyra. Anyways, he's now sitting beside Rhaenyra as her hand in his father's stead, but in the book, Corlys never really gave such a responsibility to his son. Honestly though, I welcome this change because the show Alan does have the temperament to make a good hand. In fact, he's the only one who offers the Queen a reasonable solution, which she accepts as well. But then, a delegation sent by Lord Borros Baratheon arrives and tells Rhaenyra how Borros is off fighting a Dornish bandit who liked to call himself the Vulture King. Now, here comes another major book difference. Rhaenyra is obviously pissed because Borros didn't himself come to meet her and bend the knee, and instead sent his cousin. But this man offers anything he can to Rhaenyra as a mark of respect, and she asks him for their clothes. Rhaenyra dresses her own men in Baratheon colors and sends them to Tumbleton to assassinate Ormond and Daeron. But yeah, this is just exclusive to House of the Dragon. While we're still on the subject though, let's also talk about that kiss that Sir Alan and Princess Baela shared. Firstly, although the two of them get together, it's not until very late in the book, like after the Dance of Dragons has been completed and things had largely settled. The new ruler and their men were looking to strengthen their hold over the Six Kingdoms through political marriages, and our girl Baela was going to be another victim of such a marriage, but she flies to Driftmark and secretly marries Alan. However, in the show, they decide to bloom this relationship pretty early, and I'm not sure how Rhaenyra is going to take this union, because Baela is a dragon rider and a Targaryen. And yeah, the Westerosi don't consider the relationship between Baela and Alan as incest, because he's her full uncle, which is like the same amount of blood sharing as between two cousins. For instance, even Tywin Lannister married his cousin, and Ned Stark's parents had also been first cousins. But I digress. Their kiss also revealed that under the Dragon Pit, there are actually barracks where dragon riders can rest and store their gear, which is how in the first season, Rhaenys went into the Dragon Pit during Aegon II's coronation without her armor, but came out wearing one. But maybe the most fascinating thing to happen at King's Landing was Helena's cross-stitching. You see, she basically made a picture of Aemond One-Eye, cocooned in blood, with Harrenhal in the backdrop. This clearly means that Aemond is never leaving that cursed castle. He's going to stay there, probably knock Alice up nice and good, and then Daemon would eventually arrive on Caraxes to face him and Vhagar. However, in the book, Aemond does leave Harrenhal at least once after taking it from the Strongs, after having a disagreement with Criston Cole about their next move after learning that Rhaenyra had taken King's Landing. Secondly, while the book didn't pay a lot of attention to the dreaming abilities of Helena, the show is very vocal about it. And lastly, Rhaenyra has finally cut herself on the Iron Throne, after which she looks up straight at the statue of her father, King Viserys, who was also known to cut himself on the Iron Throne. As you might already know, those who suffer this fate are often considered unfit to rule, as if the throne itself had judged them. Now, in the book, she did cut herself, but it wasn't so late into her tenure as queen. In Fire and Blood, Rhaenyra cuts herself right after she takes the throne. Like, she spends her first night in King's Landing listening to the pledges of fealty from the lords and ladies of King's Landing, and when she gets up, she realizes she has suffered innumerable cuts from the Iron Throne. And yeah, this isn't even the first time she's bled on it. In a previous episode, she bled because of her period while she was sitting on that damn chair. Aegon II finally concedes at Rook's Rest that he's a terrible person. We learned in a previous episode that Sir Tyland was still alive, that he survived the Battle of the Gullet, and now even the Blacks know about it through Lord Corlys and his questioning of the Triarchy pirates who have been ravaging King's Landing and its neighboring lands. Tyland never really went to fight in the Battle of the Gullet and was instead captured by Rhaenyra's men when she took King's Landing, but he was tortured gravely, so much so that he was blinded and even his manhood was cut off. At Rook's Rest, Tyland was busy digging a hole in the ground to bury Garrick, who Aegon had killed, and while Larys wanted to sail to Braavos, Tyland disagreed, telling Aegon that they should head to Casterly Rock and form a court there. Aegon asks Tyland if he thought Aegon was a terrible person, and after some fumbling, Tyland kinda sort of agreed, and Aegon didn't see any point in staying in Westeros to reclaim his throne. The man now knows he's an unfit ruler, which, I gotta agree, is a pretty mature thing to realize, but in the book, we learn nothing of the journey that Larys Strong and Aegon make after escaping from King's Landing. The show, however, is doing us a favor by detailing the things that the two men faced during their travels. Tensions brewing in Tumbleton. While Hugh Hammer lands Vermithor outside of Tumbleton to exchange the watch with Ulf White, the two show signs of unhappiness, even as they now have their own dragons to ride. And although these two become the notorious two betrayers in the book, it seems that the reasons behind their eventual desertion of Team Black will be different in the show. What's more interesting about Tumbleton, though, is the fact that Gawain Hightower has returned. First of all, he was killed early in the book by Luther Largent when Rhaenyra took King's Landing, and secondly, he never reached Harrenhal. The falling out I was talking about earlier between Cole and Aemond was actually given to Gawain and Cole in the show. In any case, Ormond Hightower makes two statements here that seem to suggest that Gawain, in a way, is gay. Firstly, he makes a pointed remark about Gawain that despite all the hardships he suffered during his march since King's Landing and to Tumbleton, Gawain must have found some solace in some of his brothers in arms. And secondly, when he asks King Daemon to escort his uncle to a bath, he asks his grace to be careful and keep his back to the wall, to which Gawain simply shakes his head in frustration and disappointment. Additionally, Gawain also mentions that he was second in line to the lordship of Old Town. Now, firstly, we have no confirmation from the book about Sir Gawain's sexuality in the book, and as for him being second in line, we do know that Ormond had several children, which means that according to the rules of inheritance that Westeros follows, Gawain could not possibly be second in line. And, needless to say, the opportunistic predator Ormond never really made Daemon a king in the book, so that entire plot is an invention of the show. But a nice one, since this adds another faction to the Civil War, making things more interesting than they already are. Princess Rhaena gets slapped in the Vale. We see Rhaena once again for no good reason, to be honest. She saw Moondancer fly along with Seasmoke and wanted to meet her, so she probably went into town. Contrary to the book, she's now the rider of Sheepstealer, as the show decided to simply cull nettles from the entire story. Secondly, Lady Jane Arryn has harbored Rhaena in the Vale, which is also a diversion from the book because Sheepstealer hardly ever flew as far north as the Vale. But yeah, this scene was powerful for showing just how strong a woman Lady Jane was. Not only did she enjoy throwing people from the moon door, she also slapped a Targaryen princess who happened to be a dragon rider. And the events at the Vale also confirmed that word has spread across the Seven Kingdoms that Rhaenyra thinks the rider of Sheepstealer is in fact dead. An unholy union between Alyce and Aemond at Harrenhal. After Aemond slaughtered the bounty hunters who had come for his head, Alyce Rivers patched up the wounded prince. The whole exchange felt strangely romantic, especially from Alyce's side, although Aemond had already decided to leave Harrenhal and search for Vhagar. He feared that something terrible had happened to his dragon, but Alyce offered another explanation. Perhaps Vhagar had left to protect him because her absence prevented anyone from discovering where he had taken refuge. Alyce wanted him to remain at Harrenhal until spring, and needless to say, she had more than his recovery on her mind. As Aemond prepared to leave, a stable boy spotted him. Alyce immediately stabbed the boy to death, which was unfortunate, although Aemond had been ready to kill him anyways. As they stood over the body, Alyce explained that she had done it to prove that she would protect his secret. Aemond asked what game she had played, and Alyce replied, "It's yours to learn, if your spirit is willing." Now, that sounds like another cryptic Alyce Rivers line, but what came next was genuinely insane. She led Aemond into a room covered with vines and opened an old chest that contained 5 dragon eggs. Aemond looked stunned, and frankly, I was right there with him. Alyce placed one of the cold eggs in his hand, and it became warm as it responded to his Targaryen blood. Alyce then admitted that she had grown tired of life as a secondary figure in other people's stories. She wanted a family of her own, and apparently Aemond had become part of that plan. They kissed, and for once it seems like neither person is actually related to the other, at least as far as we know. The short version is that Alyce wanted children with Aemond, and those children would receive dragons. This was less a marriage proposal and more the foundation of a new dragon dynasty, which was certainly one way to move a relationship forward. Alyce explains that Dreamfire had laid the 5 eggs roughly a century earlier. She also told Aemond about his ancestor, Rhaena, although Rhaena was actually the elder sister of his great-grandfather, King Jaehaerys. After the death of her daughter, Rhaena had withdrawn to Harrenhal and spent the remainder of her life there in isolation. However, Fire and Blood never said that Dreamfire had left a clutch of eggs at the castle during those years. The repeated names could be confusing, so here was the family distinction. Daemon's daughter Rhaena shared her name with Jaehaerys' sister because dynasties reuse names all the time. Likewise, that older Rhaena's grandmother was called Rhaenys because she had been named after Jaehaerys' grandmother, Rhaenys, who was the sister wife of Aegon the Conqueror. Yup, this family tree had always demanded concentration. Season 2 had already altered the history of Daenerys Targaryen's 3 dragon eggs, and Fire and Blood heavily implied that Dreamfire had laid them because 3 of her eggs were stolen and later sold in the Free Cities. However, the series had Rhaenyra send her stepdaughter Rhaena to the Eyrie with 2 hatchlings and 4 eggs. 3 of those eggs had recently come from Syrax at the end of Season 1. Ryan Condal's comments in the Season 2 behind-the-scenes material seems to suggest that Syrax's eggs would eventually become Dany's. which would have changed up the book's implication. However, he later said that the matter had been left deliberately ambiguous. This episode strengthened that ambiguity because it introduced another group of eggs that had definitely come from Dreamfire. Therefore, there's now a genuine possibility that Aemond had held the egg that would one day hatch Drogon. Alice claimed that the eggs had remained at Harrenhal for these 100 years. Based on the period when Rhaena and Dreamfire lived there, the actual gap would be closer to 70 years, although Alice may have rounded the number up. Either way, 5 hidden dragon eggs and a proposed family with Aemond had turned her Harrenhal plan into something far greater than control of the castle. Daemon finds Lord Traitor of Flea Bottom. Daemon studied the bloody message on the city watch wall, a feast for traitors. More gold cloaks then approached him and resigned so they could return to their families. Daemon tore into them, but they left anyways, which deprived the city of protection and cost him his private army. Naturally, Daemon responded with another flawless disguise. He wore a City Watch helmet, although his Targaryen hair spilled out, making his identity painfully obvious. He used himself as bait, and the Hightower spy from the previous episode followed him into an alley. Daemon subdued the man and pressed a knife to his ear. The spy felt no fear and declared his devotion to Daeron the Daring. He also admitted that he hated Rhaenyra, so Daemon stabbed him through the ear and left him to die. In Fire and Blood, Daeron earned that title at the Battle of the Honeywine after Tessarion broke the Black armies that had surrounded Ormond's main force. The series left this battle off-screen, apart from a brief council report Aemond heard in The Red Sowing. Daeron disliked the title and rejected the praise because he believed Tessarion deserved the credit. A luncheon of blood and puke at Tumbleton. While seated at the table, Ormond subjected Gwaine and Daeron to another misogynistic lecture. He praised Corlys's sound breeding, but showed little respect for Otto Hightower, which is when the filthy fake envoys of Rhaenyra arrived. Alicent had told Rhaenyra about Ormond's weakness for strong smells, so Rhaenyra used it against him, making him uncomfortable and dimming his wits. Ormond fell for the disguise, but Gwaine exposed the assassins and helped kill them. Daeron appeared to be their main target, with Ormond likely second, but yeah, none of this really happened in the book. Another difference was Sir Hugh Hammer entering Tumbleton disguised as a traitor. As Ormond emptied his stomach, Hugh found Cat. She had believed him dead, and their tearful embrace turned painful as she held him, hit him, and collapsed. Hugh then ruined the reunion by talking about his dragon and how he's become a knight. Cat needed her husband, not this new man who had come to her. She also implied that she had suffered and perhaps worse during her journey from King's Landing, although she gave no details. When Hugh tried to take her away, she screamed and refused to abandon her family and asked who he was. After his earlier question about whether Ulf would surrender everything gained as a dragon rider, Hugh may have finally realized that he had chosen poorly. But as I mentioned, none of this really happened in the book, so it's purely an invention of the show. Rhaenyra asks Alicent to become her son's assassin. Rhaenyra earlier learned from Alicent that Helaena was a dreamer and could foresee things. When Rhaenyra points out that Vhagar hadn't been seen at Harrenhal, Alicent tells her that Helaena only saw Aemond at Harrenhal and not Vhagar, which meant that Aemond was now hiding within the castle walls and no amount of soldiers would be able to draw him out, so the only way to slay Aemond was by sending a faceless man with a sword. This person was going to be our good Queen Dowager Alicent Hightower, but in the book, Alicent never even visits Harrenhal, nor does she make a deal with Rhaenyra to save her daughter and granddaughter in exchange for slaying Aemond. Alicent remains a staunch supporter of the Green Cause right until the end, but yeah, the woman does lose her mind eventually, and maybe the same fate will befall her after visiting Harrenhal if she does finish her journey there. Corlys was never captured. The episode ended when Bold Jon Roxton, played by Joplin Sibtain, attacked Corlys and apparently captured him under Ormond's orders. Earlier, Ormond had allowed his admiration for the sea snake to slip, which made the abduction feel less like a tactic to weaken Rhaenyra and more like a tactic to strengthen Daeron. Perhaps he wants Corlys to serve Daeron as Hand of the King. If that is his plan, then Ormond's delusion has reached an impressive new height because he's apparently convinced himself that Corlys might help crown another Hightower-backed king. Still, the episode didn't confirm his purpose, so that remains speculation. Needless to say, none of this came from fire and blood. Ormond never declared Daemon king in the book, which means the series created this entire plot and left us to wonder what he intended to do with Lord Valerion. But yeah, that's all we got for you this time, folks. If you like this video, please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons. Those 2 small clicks are the best way to get more videos like this in your life, and it really helps us make these videos too. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and we'll see you next time.